Is the life of an American worth more than the life of an African? Is it more important that you can identify all of the nations of Europe on a map compared to being able to name any of the nations on an African map? What I feel that as an American, I've been conditioned to prioritize people's lives based on where they were born. So that Americans, their lives, their souls are worth more than people's souls in Kuwait or, let me think, Nambia. There's a country in Africa, right? So American lives matter more than those. God bless the USA and no one else, or God bless us more at least, since God's obviously blessed all those countries less than America. So God's really on our side. Whatever war we fight in, obviously, He's on our side. I think that's what a lot of Americans have been conditioned to believe. I was challenged, though. What really brought this to light for me, one of my favorite shows is Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown. It's on Netflix. He does an episode where he goes to Vietnam, North Vietnam, and he caused me to ask myself this question. What if, instead of being born in 1981 in America, what if instead I was born in North Vietnam and I was old enough to have fought in the war as America got involved? Now, a lot of Vietnam, especially North Vietnam, was actually Catholic. Of course, as we know, communism took over and all that, but there were a lot of Catholic people in North Vietnam as the war was happening. So that what was going on to some degree, this is a real scenario that could have happened, and I could have been this North Vietnamese guy. I was a Catholic who was basically forced to fight in the war as a North Vietnamese against South Vietnamese and against the Americans. So by default, the South Vietnamese and the Americans were my enemies in this war that I was thrown into and basically had to be a part of. And I was Catholic. So I was a believer, I was a Christian, right? And so now I'm having to shoot this guy and he doesn't shoot me, we're attacking each other. But yet the guy attacking, let's say in theory the guy attacking me was not a Christian. So we've got someone who's on the wrong side politically of this war, which is North Vietnamese, and he's a Christian. But then there's this non-Christian American and they're fighting. It challenged me to think, what if I was that North Vietnamese guy? Did I have any less favor than the American side? Was God rooting for America during that war? What happened to all those souls of those people in North Vietnam who were Catholic and were forced to fight against the Americans and against South Vietnam? It makes me wonder. Well, I already know what I believe. What I'm implying is, I don't believe that God is governed by the borders and the political wars that we involve ourselves in. And it's easy to say, well, okay, well, Vietnam, that was a long time ago. We've learned from our mistakes. We don't want another Vietnam. Okay, so is that to say that every war since Vietnam, we've done the right thing? That every war, that God absolutely was on our side? And it's funny because I can go back to my hometown and there's a Confederate War Monument right there in downtown in the park. And last year I took the time to actually read some of the inscriptions on there. And it was these people basically praying. It was basically saying, God, thank you for being on our side and fighting for all these souls that are fighting for your name. And those are people fighting on, for the South, for the Confederate. And I was reading that and I thought, those people truly believed that God was on their side. The side that ultimately was wanting to keep slavery happening. And that statue still exists in my hometown as it exists in many people's towns, those Confederate war monuments. And I'm not here to say we should plow it out. I'm not a political guy. I'm using that as a reference point though. Because people tend to think, if they're Christians, that God is on their side when they fight in a war. And therefore it's easy to believe that as Americans, or whatever political party you're on, or whatever it is, that God's on your side. There's this form of nationalism where America is the best country and therefore our lives are worth more. But then even then you see how it gets divided between Democrats and Republicans, and they both believe if they if they're Christian, they believe that God's on their side. No, Jesus was a Democrat. No, Jesus was a Republican. So we see all these things where we place God and we put these labels on him. He's on our side. We believe in him. We can think of all the things we believe in, and we can connect him to things that line up with Christianity. He's on our side. And what gets lost in the translation is, but doesn't God love us all the same? Aren't our souls, aren't our lives worth an equal amount? Didn't Jesus tell us to pray for our enemies? So therefore we think of certain countries, maybe in the Middle East, for example, and we think of, oh, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, all these places. Oh yeah, they're all bad. They're all bad. And then of course we neglect the part of how America might be involved in getting oil, whatever. We forget about the political, because whatever we're doing as Americans, God has favor on us, right? God bless the USA and no one else, or at least more than everybody else, to where we actually begin to think it's real, that an American soul, an American life is worth more than a life in some other country that's not politically aligned with us. And when we can name Africa, because there's so many of those countries, we can't even name the countries, we can name the continent. We tend to forget it's a continent. But even then, because they're not necessarily on our side, their souls, their lives become worth less in our minds because we're Americans. And I'm 36 now, and it's taken me this long to really think about that. No, God loves us all the same. And we can't just cast millions of people aside because they're on the wrong political lines or they were born in the wrong country. I don't see it working like that at all. I'm proud to be an American, very much so. But I will not allow my patriotism to get in the way of trying to see human life is the way God sees it, and where there's not national borders and political parties that necessarily define the value of one's soul and the value of one's life. I'm Nick Shell with Family Friendly Daddy Blog. My goal is simply to challenge you in the way that I was challenged by that episode of Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown.